April 20th. Yours is off.
Mine was off.
Turn it
There
on.
we go. Okay. Good evening. Welcome to the April 25th, 2024 Board of Education study session. We are calling this meeting to order. We have all of our members here. We're going to first do the Pledge of Allegiance. Doug, you can lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Ready, begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. All righty, and before we roll call, we have everyone here ready to proceed. I do need a motion for the approval of the agenda. We will be doing this audibly, not through the computer basis.
I move approval.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Passes 5-0. Moving on to public comments. Do we have any public comments? None. All right. So we're going to go into our study session, planning for the 24-25 school year. Dr. Barr.
Okay, thank you, everyone. We're going to go ahead and do this presentation from the dais, so make sure that we can answer questions as we go along. And so tonight what we hope to get is do a quick review of kind of what budget review of why we're discussing budget reductions, provide an update on new information that we may have, and then what we're hoping to gain from the board is direction as far as moving forward in our adopted budget for 24-25 school year. So without further ado, Squire take the lead on this one.
Good evening, Board President and Board, and all of you in the audience. Thank you, those of you watching from home. So first I'm going to start off with a few slides that we've seen before a couple of different times. Some of them at the previous study session, and also some that were reiterated at our second interim presentation, just to catch everybody up to where we are, and then we'll move on from there for some discussion. So first, the slide here on the screen. This is the multi-year projection that is inclusive of a fourth year. So remember when we adopt our budget in June, that fourth year of 26-27 will become the third year of MYP. That's the year of measure for fiscal solvency, and that's the third year required to be included in our adopted budget. So that's why it's here now at this time of the year. What you see on the screen is somewhat shocking, and this is the multi-year projection adjusted for the January proposal from the governor of the state budget, which we all have heard plenty of times over, with that COLA reduced quite a bit, a few other things as well that have caused a reduction in expected revenue for our district and for every school district. So you can walk through that. The green box at the bottom I usually use to signify that we are meeting our reserve. It's odd to have a negative number down there. That's why it's in red. A negative number in that line indicates that we do not have enough money in our ending balance to meet our minimum required reserve. And that's why it shows red and why it's negative. So in that case, the first year, 24-25, we would be missing our reserve by $6 million. And so on. You can see as that plays out, that we would end up in that fourth year without any action taken and standing with just everything as we're doing right now. We would end up with a $28 million less than our minimum reserve. So that's the state that we started off all of this journey on. This slide now is doing the math on this, is how much would we need to reduce our expenses to then maintain a positive ending balance, meaning that we have more in our ending balance than our required reserve, or at least break even at zero, and to have the minimum amount of reductions in expenses in each of these 4 years, including the current year, in order to remain fiscally solvent in that fourth year that we could adopt our budget on without receiving a qualified or negative certification, which would signal fiscal insolvency. And so you can see the numbers across the top now. $2.5 million, that's how much that we're working on with a budget freeze and kind of reconsidering some current year expenses and things we're doing to try to get to $2.5 million of savings in the current year relative to what the expenses were projected to be when we adopted our budget for the year. Next year, that's the big number, $8.1 million in reductions there, and then $3 million in each of the other subsequent years. And if we were to hit those numbers with the revenue expectation from the January's proposal for the state budget, then we would be just a bit over, about $300,000 over meeting our minimum reserve. That's very, very, very close to not meeting our reserve, but these would be then the minimum level of reductions to get to that point. Then after the January proposal, some new information came out where there was to realize that, one, the current year funding for school districts was actually overfunded by about $8 billion, and that was because the state adopted their budget with revenue expectations, but then they delayed the tax collections, and so those taxes came in much less than what they had built their budget on. And that amount of tax collections is what drives the amount of money required by the state constitution to revenue for school districts for public education, actually all the way through up through community colleges. And so the Legislative Analyst's Office, the organization, state agency that measures the cost impacts of any budget decisions or legislative action, they've been making some recommendations, and so things that they're going back and forth with the legislature and the governor about are perhaps a way to solve the budget issue with the state and the large deficit there would be to pull back on some of the things that were started before or started during or after COVID. And so you can see on the screen some things that have been suggested with perhaps pulling back unspent ELOP monies, reducing or pulling back on contracting a preschool expansion, a transportation expansion of funding. We got some additional funds for transportation, certainly not enough to cover our expenses, but more money nonetheless. The additional monies that are provided for every TK student that helps for us to provide the second adult in each of those rooms as required by that law and program. Perhaps the subsidies that they provide to make sure every school district can provide universal meals for free to our students. Also, it was even suggested to take that COLA from the almost 4% that it was supposed to be to the 0.76 in the January proposal. Well, if it's going that low, why don't you just make it zero, was another thing that the Legislative Analyst's Office suggested. If you take some of those things that are part of our annual revenues, that's about $4.5 million more in annual revenue reduction that we could see if the governor and the legislature agree to take some of these recommendations. Now, they might do something different at this. They might do a mixture of these. They might do some version of this. But certainly with the fact that they've overfunded the current year and have a large deficit in the state budget, something perhaps more could be coming. And so we have to keep our eye on that. Very interested in what happens in May with the May revise. We'll hear a lot more about what their plans are for that.
Mr. McGuire, could you go back to that previous slide, please?
Yes, sir. This one?
Okay, the ELOP, are they looking at reducing or eliminating that? Is that what the slide is saying?
What has been suggested is not necessarily reducing the entitlement, although they could, but is that there is a lot of districts as they got started off and they started funding it fully, even our program, and we are way ahead of the curve on this, have not been able to spend that first year of money. So there's some money that's would carry over that we just haven't spent in many districts. And I will tell you, there's some districts, same size as us, some much larger, that are sitting on many more millions of dollars in carryover. And so the state could look at that as it's unspent funds from a previous year. If we pull that back, it could help to solve some of the budget issue here, especially considering that part of the issue is that they've overfunded education by about $8 billion too, which some of that would be inclusive in that. So they haven't, again, the May revise will be much more informative about what their thoughts are on what more they might do to us to solve their problem in Sacramento.
Thank you. And I would also contest the wording that they've overfunded education. I don't think we have adequately funded it.
Oh, I
Even if
absolutely
they feel
agree with
that we
you. What I'm
have.
talking about is the Prop 98 guarantee for public education in our state constitution, which is tied to tax revenue. And because those tax revenues came in lower than they projected, that's why they gave us more money. Now, I'll tell you, in a year where they fund us fully to the Prop 98 guarantee, they still underfund education, absolutely.
Thank you for that clarification.
Okay, moving on. Another thing that could affect our revenue, and certainly at this point, very sure that it will, is our average daily attendance. And so what we've updated the chart there that I've shown you a few times as we're tracking it now by month. And that's, we saw in December, that month 5 there, that's updated all the way through March now. That December is the lowest point there. And then as we were hoping and expected, that we started to climb out of that dip as we got into the spring. And we can confidently say at this point, we're very close to the end of the road on measuring what our ADA will be for this year and certifying that we certainly believe that with all confidence that we won't fall below 92. Now, that being said, next year's expectation and our revenues were built on, and our adopted budget were built on expectation of next year hitting 95%. And we expected this year to be higher than 92. And so because of that, in December at our first interim, we actually already had reduced our expectation of revenue from 95% for ADA down to 94. And we're watching this and seeing where our P2 or our certified ADA for the current year comes in, and it might be necessary for us to reduce that expectation down to 93% for next year. That would have in the next year's revenue an impact of about $500,000 reduced. And then in that following year, because of the formula and how that works for determining funding to ADA, could even be as much as $2 million in that following year. So that's something that we're keeping an eye on, and certainly would be a conversation as we come forward to adopt our budget in June. That would be we would have a more updated for the whole year, and then discuss the impacts of that as well as anything else that we're doing to mitigate that issue in the future years. Any questions on the ADA slide before I move on? Okay. So we do have some revenue, if you will, in our control that we brought forward in our last study session, and that was the Learning Emergency Recovery Plan, that we had some ideas and some plans set aside what we can do with that, and then it was decided that, and we talked with the board, thought it was best for us to reallocate those funds in a way that we could hold on to them, and that would become a buffer to help to soften the blow of any future cuts that may come and get us through anything unexpected given the reduction in our revenue expectation for the next few years. And so just to kind of really quickly go over that, our current funding for that is $20 million. It's a one-time fund. That money is in the Treasury. And they're talking about using that in the following years to satisfy a lawsuit brought by some families in Oakland Unified that now affects the whole state related to COVID learning loss. And so they would apply some new rules to that and make it less unrestricted, if you will, for us. And so our plan was then while we have the opportunity in the current year, was to use that money to offset current year expenses, which essentially then allows that money to fall to the bottom line. That will create a larger ending balance that'll help to, again, help to continue to pay for things like our Limitless Learning Academy, which was part of the LERT plan originally, so we're just retaining that just in our ending balance. Any ADA adjustments we have to make to our revenue, any unforeseen new expenses, and in a school district like ours, obviously those come up from time to time, and then any reduction to the COLA that might still happen, not only in the next year, if they reduce that further, But also even what was not really got a lot of headlines, but they reduced the expected COLA for the following year, not just next year already, in the January proposal. And one of the ideas the governor had for reducing that, the deficit, but also the overfunding to their term of education the current year, would be to borrow against future years. So that would affect the COLA. The COLA is, as I kind of like describe it now, is like the volume button. That's the mechanism that the governor has and the legislature has to turn up and down funding for education and other state programs. And just as an aside, there's an article came out today. There's a calculation that determines what a statutory COLA or like what the calculated COLA would be. And right now that's been calculated at about 1.07%. There is a law that was changed some number of years ago that actually the state's not required to fund that COLA. They do what's called a funded COLA. And so the legislature can change that to any number they want, essentially. And just to call attention to an example of that was a year leading into the COVID year where they, even in one of the proposals, I think it was the May revision, they had it to be a negative 10% COLA because the state was in some bad financial times. And so obviously there's never been a 10% drop in the cost of living, but that's just shows that that's how they're able to reduce or increase funding to state programs, including education. So now we're waiting to see what the May revision, and generally speaking, what we've seen is the May revision should be more close to what we should expect in June. It could still change in June, but that'll give us a lot of insight on their thoughts for how they're solving their problem related to the COLA. Having an increase to our ending balance will help us to absorb that without having to find even more reductions to make in order to remain fiscally solvent. Is there any questions on this one before we move on? Okay. So then this is a multi-year projection where we've executed the LERP plan, which is redundant. It's the Learning Emergency Recovery Plan as it's written on the screen here. But we like to commonly call it the LERP, so this is the LERP plan. And as you can see, the ending balances there grow because of expending that money in the current year, offsetting current year expenses. That doesn't mean finding new things to spend money on. It's just taking that money and using it to pay current year expenses to create that bottom line, that buffer there. And you can see as we now go through the expected revenue declines, because of the things we've talked about already, that ending balance continues to dwindle down from the 23 down to the 14 million in that year. Now, if we do see something around the $4.5 million additional reduction to revenue from some of those things I showed you before, that 14 million goes down to very close to zero again. But if they do that, we're able to afford our current plan of reductions without adding more reductions to it, and that's absolutely necessary to maintain the health of our education programs here. And I didn't put the green boxes on there because this is not a celebration of anything. This is us doing whatever we can to stay in the driver's seat and reduce the impact that Sacramento may have on Escondido. Any questions now? Ms. Gardner?
No, I don't have a question,
Okay.
but that's again with the anticipated reduction for the 24-25 school year of 8.1 million.
Yeah, that's already baked
Yeah,
in.
that's
Those
baked
reductions are
into
baked
those.
into this. Correct.
Okay.
So now, just kind of walk through some of the stuff we leading into the last study session. So on the left, this column here, this is our unrestricted general fund, broken down into the parts that make it up. So what makes it up are the base dollars and the base allocation that every district gets per student that totals up to about $154 million for our district. And then there's the green box there, that's the supplemental and concentration, and so that's based on the amount of unduplicated count students you would have in your district. Ours is right about 80%, and that then generates more dollars in the form of supplemental concentration, and that's something we more commonly refer to as what we build our LCAP around. We're required to do things that increase services to the students that make up our unduplicated count with those dollars. The red box at the top is the deficit, that if we maintain that level of deficit or less, then we follow that plan as described before with those reductions. Okay, so even with those reductions, we're not without a deficit. We're still riding on with the deficit, but we're able to at least remain above our required reserve in that fourth year. The right side column is now really the combination of how we really look at it is base plus. And that's all the things we do as a district. And with an 80% in duplicate account, pretty much all the things we do as a district are those types of things that you would do in your LCAP. And really it makes sense. So in the base plus there, that includes all of the things that are in supplemental concentration as well as the base. And then the activity that we did at that meeting was we had $3.9 million that had still to be planned, and we went through an activity for you guys to help us into filling up that $3.9 million. The things that are in base plus, just to remind everyone what kind of makes that up, it's all of the things like keeping the lights on, all of that, of course, but then these are some more of the more highlights of what's also included in our base plus. You can see that list there. So these are things that are in our budget as it stands with all those reductions, all of that. These are things that are still within our budget for next year. These are some budget reductions that came about for a variety of different ways. One of them is there's some plans that were already in place, some previous board meetings from years past, right? In that, like, how are we spending our ESSER funds? How are we using our LCAP carryover from the previous year, which is really just kind of a one-time resource money that didn't get spent, but we have to budget. It doesn't get replenished that amount, so it's kind of a one-time thing. So previous plans, monies that were already sunsetting, or monies that were used for things that let us, and some of that ESSER funding and the LCAP carryover led us to continue things even beyond the original plans that were developed during the COVID years. But as those monies expire, run out, plans sunset, so those are already reductions that were already included in our multi-year projections, even at the adopted budget. But at the top there, first I wanted to highlight there was some administrative and confidential positions that were already reduced, and so just kind of quickly walk through that. You can see what they are up there. We do have assistant principals at every middle school, but some of them had more than two, and so we were going down to the two. The principal at Limitless Learning Academy is also going to be covering that for Del Dios, so we made some changes there. I just wanted to explain what that one meant there, and then an additional position up there as well that has been reduced going forward. Our TOSAs are on there. They're actually moving back into classroom positions. Our science adoption was delayed, really, and it was part of our original alert plan, but delayed until we can see when the dust settles and know where we stand. And then, of course, we would be able to, going into next year, look at where we are and see what adjustments we could make on that. And then across the board, as close as we could get to a 10% reduction to supply and services budget across all of our different departments at the district level. This is the activity that we started doing with the board at the study session. So these are some of the things that we were looking for assistance on guiding us on what to fill up the $3.9 million purple box. This is a reminder of what the result of that conversation was here. And so we got all the way up to just about that $3.9 million figure. So those are all things that are included in our budget now. And then that leads us into, so one of the things on that list was combo mitigation at the kindergarten and first grade level. And at that time, we estimated that to need about 13 FTEs, or about $1.9 million for the cost of those FTEs. Now, that was prior to us working on the staffing grids that we would work on with our elementary school principals and enrollment projections. And so once we got the enrollment projections out, working on those site grids so they can, staff with those projections by grade level at each of the schools, working with the principals, that changed what the expectation of what we would need as far as FTEs. And so Audrey's going to start speaking to this couple of slides here.
So based on your direction, we had 13 spots for K through 1 mitigation, and we met with each principal, really looked at staffing, and really looked at actual staffing, actual kids. What do we think is going to move up? So we were able to really be tight, but have room, and we only needed 6 spots. So that cost us $680,000, which left $1.2 million left over from that 1.9 million. So now the question is, what to do with that money? Keep going. Okay, so based on all of the feedback that we heard over the last board meetings, as from intervention teachers, clearly intervention was like the thing that we heard all the time. So there's a proposal, and if we go to the next one. There's a proposal, so currently, if you look at the intervention FTE, this is what is currently at, based on the Title I money that is at every school, except for the non-Title I schools, so they have none. So this is the intervention FTE of certificated people, not classified, for each site, based on what money they had and what they were spending it on. And if you look at the notes, that is the current staffing that they had, that they have decided to do. Noting that in red is the district-funded TOSAs, that there were 4 that were going back to the classroom to support the schools. 3 were in the elementary school, and then the one, do you want to talk about that? Oh, and then the other is going to Del Dios, the middle school, and then there's one grant-funded TOSA that was awarded to Lincoln that will also be supporting ELA at Lincoln Elementary. So it's important to know that there's, for example, Central has 0.75, oh no, I wanted to get to the para, oh here. So Felicita will have a 0.5 right now math interventionist, and a 0.5 math para to support also. That's if we did nothing.
That's based on the current Title I funding for next year and the decisions that the principal made on how to use that to support the intervention programs at their schools that receive Title I. What you see on the next column there is taking that $1.2 million that was the remainder after the combo mitigation, once we discovered we didn't need as much there, a proposal then to align that with I lost the word, about the comparability law, where we have to apply our LCAP funds or Title I funds and how they kind of come together. So an equal distribution of those of a 0.5 FTE for intervention at every single school in the district, and doing that equal distribution of that is required for us to get it into the non-Title I schools as it lays out now. And so that final column is then the total of new intervention. If the board was interested in this being an adopted, this proposal to adopting this, or at least giving direction to build this into our adopted budget, then that would be the new number of FTEs, which only includes the certificated ones. As you see, there are some classified FTEs as devoted to intervention at some of these schools.
That would continue.
And that would all continue through. And so that would be the new layout of intervention here. But then Dr. Filia was going to speak to some of the other ways intervention happens in our schools now and in the future.
So just to dive in a little bit on this part, we have structures in place. We've been working on this with our school sites, with our teams, on ensuring that they are able to be able to find structures and implement structures where they would be supporting students who need intervention. And so on the elementary side, you've heard us reference this term of universal access. And that is something that we've been working with our principals on, instituting structures where there's a common grade level time where they're able to work together as a team. So let's say you have 4 first grade teachers, they would all have their universal access time for language arts at the same time. And the idea there is that they would then be able to share their students during that, say, 30-minute block, and then be able to differentiate. So perhaps one teacher takes kids that are more at or above grade level, another teacher takes the ones that kind of are struggling with various issues, and then maybe then they would be able to differentiate. And so by sharing and working together, using that wheel time for collaboration, where they're reviewing their data, where they're planning together as far as specific instructional approaches and setting goals and monitoring progress, that structure could be effective with an intervention teacher or without. If you have an intervention teacher, then you could further differentiate those groupings during those times. If you didn't, regardless, you would still have the ability with the teams to be able to differentiate. And so that's a structure that we've been really supporting our principals on to ensure that those things are happening across the grade levels, and just really, because it does take time for teams to come together, collaborate, get into that process of reviewing data and being able to share their students to meet their needs. So,
And so what happens during this structured time, it's both, there's time set aside for language arts and math. That means they have a block where they're teaching math, and then another block where they're now, the universal access time, where now you could say, okay, Zesty is in this group, this is in this group, and you're in that group. And that's when you're looking at the research and kind of what is the direction. It's first need to diagnose where everybody is, and we have that. Looking at the best practices, districts are utilizing NWA, iReady, because you diagnose what kids need. And then based on that data, you have to do something with it, okay? Who needs letters and sounds? Who needs, back to the language arts, who needs the phonics? In a number sense, what are the gaps, what are the skills, what do the advanced students need, the kids who are at grade level? That's the time where you can now further bring in small groups. And again, that will happen if there's an intervention in the mix, you could then you are able to bring in the intervention teacher so that the students are not being pulled out for language arts when it's math time, that it's all continuous, so they get a double dose, if you will, of language arts and then another time for math. So that'll help organize that. If you have intervention teachers, you can get to more kids. If you don't, you still have that time. So intervention can still happen and is happening and will happen during the school day.
And when you're working with students, I absolutely see the logic in it. If you're working with students of similar abilities and similar needs, it's easier than having to make provisions for different levels.
Right.
So that really makes sense to me.
and so that work will continue as far as ensuring that we are kind of reviewing those instructional schedules with our principals to ensure, and also how to best support, so that when they do come together during wheel time, when they are collaborating together, that they're being effective in reviewing their data, progress monitoring, and that way those groups can also be fluid. So if a student doesn't need to be in that group anymore, they can move on to another group. So that is for elementary. Additionally, for middle school, another piece that we've been working with our middle school principals as they are developing their master schedules. And the idea there is that historically we have had 2 periods for ELA. And so the idea is that we would decouple those 2 periods, really to allow for more flexibility within their development of the schedule. And so from that, in our discussions with the principals, each has a slightly different kind of approach depending on their needs and their data. They've been able to identify specific sections where they would be able to provide intervention or even enrichment sections. And so again, they would be looking at data, looking at different ways to ensure that they were, that those groupings were flexible, and that we would continue to help support with progress monitoring.
So now, intervention is, before everyone had the double block, now only the kids who really need that second dose, i.e. intervention, will be assigned to those classes. Without, and therefore, like we would always struggle with, okay, when do they get an elective? Well, it was difficult to fit them in. So we're hoping this is going to allow more sections to be offered, and then kids can have more time also for enrichment for those students who are at grade level. They'll have that extra period.
Yes.
Can I make a point real quick? Very much appreciate this. I think our eventual, and I understand my colleagues are tired of hearing me say this, but our eventual best intervention is good first instruction and structures where students can receive interventions within their own classroom with their own teacher. So I'm very pleased that we're working toward making that the norm, so that students aren't hopefully needing to be pulled out for outside intervention. So thank you.
Additionally, we've talked before about our ELOP programming and after school, and so that is something that we want to continue to make sure that we are including intervention offerings for students. And so the first section there just speaks to what we have currently in place for this school year. So you'll see there that in the fall session, for example, those are 45 offerings out of the 318, and those are focused on intervention. And so there you can just see that we're continuing to talk to our site liaisons as well as our teachers to see about them making sure that they're able to offer intervention after school. For summer, of course, we have our summer programming, and that also will include a focus on math intervention. And this year, we are planning to increase the amount of math intervention teachers that are working with us over the summer. We have some great teachers with the Bridges program who've been trained and will be trained and supported to ensure that they're offering that to students who are participating in the summer program. And then for next year, again, we're going to continue to encourage and to share information with our staff so that they might be able to continue to offer those intervention classes. And I think we've talked about it here before, that model of maybe having the first 30 minutes be focused on intervention and then have 30 minutes focused on enrichment. And that might also encourage participation of both students and staff.
Okay. So really, at this point, we brought, new information. Is really the new information is we're still waiting for the May revise. But so we're positioned perfectly for if there's any other bad news, we can respond to that with the secondary plan that we have with our LER plan, kind of spending that down and increasing. That'll help us maneuver for any surprises that we might get. But knowing that, we do have this one proposal that we said, hey, if we could do something, what would it be? And we said perhaps it's intervention teachers. So at this point, we'd like to have a discussion. Is that something the board wants to do? The proposal is for half FTE in addition to what sites are already making for intervention.
Mark, do you have any thoughts?
No real thoughts. I appreciate the report. I mean, obviously, I like the idea. We've heard both from the community and the staff about the desire for getting as much intervention as we possibly can, given the structure that we can work within. So I appreciate the staff going back to work and sharpening the pencils and getting creative, and I'm supportive of kind of the recommendations, but I'm interested to hear what my colleagues feel as well.
Zesty.
I have a few opinions. So I obviously want more onto intervention. I do agree with Doug very rarely, but our best course of action is the first best instruction within the classroom, and still really focusing on that to make sure the schedule is set up, that the curriculum is set up, that the teachers are well prepared to present the new curriculum, as much support as we can give so they are effective in the classroom. And I think that goes to other things like taking things off their plate so they can focus more on the instruction of our students. But going to these intervention teachers, I mean, these schools, some of these schools are going from 2 FTEs down to a half. I don't think a half of an FTE, I mean, I can just picture this teacher drowning in my mind right off the bat. I mean, I think we need to get all the schools to at least 1 FTE. I don't think that'd be 2.5 more FTE, Doug. Like,
No, it wouldn't. It
Yeah,
would be,
no.
you'd have to give
You would
one.
have to give.
No, I
another
think we can
half in
find-
all schools.
but we
Exactly.
find it from somewhere else. Yeah, I don't think we can leave a half of FTE. That's not going to be effective. that's not gonna really make the impact and see the gains that we need. We saw the data, we've asked for the data, we saw the data from some of these schools who have had the intervention, the change it's made, bringing our students up who are 3 and 4 grade levels behind. In our schools, we need that extra help for them. Because it's not, the classroom teacher is doing their best and we're making it even better, but there's just so much need that we need these specialists that we've spent all this money on. We've spent all this time training, that we have such amazing resources in our district to provide, that I feel like it's a wasted half of an FTE. They're just not gonna make the difference. I think we ask them to find 2.5 more FTEs so we can fully staff one intervention person at each, yes, we can.
No,
Could we ask them?
It would be illegal.
exactly.
It would be completely
We can
illegal.
find it.
You would have to give a
call from
half
somewhere else.
to every single school,
You're required to.
an additional half FTE.
Could we please get an explanation of proportionality?
The proportional, comparability.
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 Well,
My
let me take that.
apologies.
You're right. If we were to use like Title I funding, or Title I funding has its own restrictions, and when we're looking at the supplemental concentration grant funding, that's what we're also talking about. If we're talking about another funding source, the other funding source would be the base, the general fund, unrestricted general fund. And so it would,
So we can look at these 75 other line items of base plus funding
I have a question.
and see where, sorry.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
You want to look at that, I understand that, but my question is, have we used the universal access plan before? Is that something that will be out ongoing, or is this a new approach?
we just started that this year, consistently throughout the district with elementary, knowing we had, especially we had intervention teachers who wanted to make sure there was being pulled out the appropriate time. So this was the first year we implemented consistently throughout the district.
And so, I know there will always be the far below basic, but I think that kind of eases the burden on the intervention teachers if there is it's more or less ability grouping and working with certain abilities at a certain level, and it's much easier to do, and it's in the classroom again, together with your classmates. So, so I'm back to comparability, if you want to.
Well, I think most importantly, we're still early in the budget development season. We don't adopt a budget until June. And as we work through how things end the year and what monies end up becoming available, perhaps things that didn't happen even beyond what we're trying to save, and that $2.5 million, I think that becomes what we need direction on, is when we determine that. And we're going to have some understanding of our ending year, where we project to be when we adopt our budget, but we're going to need some direction of, like, if new money in that form comes about and there's more resources become available than what we think at this point in time now, what should we do with them? And it sounds to me like, and I'm hearing what you're saying, Ms. Harper, that you would like that additional resources to be used to shore up the intervention program. And I think that's the direction that we're looking for as we go forward to build this adopted budget, and then, not having another study session like this. Certainly we'll continue to keep the board updated on where we're at with that, have the opportunity for other discussions even, but we really need direction on if additional funding opens up for us in some form or another, what do we do with it? What is the board's direction on what to do with that? So if that can be something we can hear tonight, that would be very helpful for us, not only in what to do with it, but then also to go about figuring out what is the way we can do that. And I think that work is ongoing. This is kind of a first pass of what we can do with what money became available from previous decisions, and that's going to continue to happen as we finish out the year. And so, hoping we can hear some thoughts from everybody and get some direction on that.
The point was, however, it's said that we needed to add 5 more half FTEs. And Doug said that's not possible. If you do that, all the other schools have to receive a half FTE as well, a 0.5 FTE. And the justification is that it would be illegal not to.
Using the funds that we were reallocating based on this, what we did with the LCAP and the Title I funds, I think we still have some more work to do. I mean, this is going to be trying to avoid a deep legal discussion that I don't think we're necessarily prepared fully for. But what we're working on already, and it's been conversations that we're having ongoing, definitely for the last couple of weeks, is what's the best way, or how can we do this and still stay legal?
Okay, wait a minute. So if we didn't use the LCAP
Yeah,
funds,
that's what I want to ask them to
we
do.
could take it from the general fund, is
Right.
what now I'm
Because
realizing
remember,
you said.
there was something else that we did also in our discussions. We had this thing called SIP, which was left over long ago when we had SIP, but it was basically unrestricted general fund dollars that we used to keep everyone held harmless from the new, when LCFF came through. But those became general fund dollars, non-supplemental concentration. So perhaps we could look at something like that. 2.5 FTEs is within the scope of possibilities. I mean, we're not talking about 20 FTEs,
Yeah,
we're not,
just
it's not $2 million we're talking now. If we're really looking at $2.5 million in through our development process finalization, we would be able to do, like going beyond the $2.5 million. Is that possible? That we did save even beyond that? That is possible, because then we're only looking about $200,000. So that is possible. So if that is the direction the board wants to go, like, hey, yeah, when you're finalizing the budget, if you can make that work, please do so. Then we would make every effort to do that. I
Well,
mean,
then
but we
wouldn't
first
worry
need
about-
also
If
here.
it's only the
If it's
5.
really, like, is intervention, kind of, the question right now is intervention in the first proposal, you're good with that, and then if you could do a little bit more, and I'm hearing from the non-Title I schools, then we
We
can do
need a
that.
little bit,
So can I just ask a question? What would this look like? So we're really talking Bernardo, Reedy Creek, North Broadway, Miller, and L.R. Green having the same FTE intervention as Rose, Orange Glen, Lincoln, Felicita? Is that what we're seeing? If we were to add additional,
For teacher FTE, because remember, there's, in the notes, you also have, they have a
not
para.
in those schools,
No.
not in the
Okay.
ones I just listed. So no, some of them do, yes. Some of them have a half FTE para and I would just ask my colleagues to consider, there's a reason why there is additional funding pointed at Title I schools. Those schools have some disadvantages that we as a school system are trying to overcome. Low parent education levels, a very high poverty level, just resources within the home and exposure within the home and within those neighborhoods that you just don't see at Bernardo or Reedy Creek. And I'm not saying that there are not kids in need. I'm just saying that proportionally, the idea of providing the same amount of intervention to a school like Bernardo and Reedy Creek that, as to Pioneer or Rose, I just think that if we're going to add additional FTEs or half FTEs, we need to do it for everybody. I understand we've received a lot of letters from the non-Title I schools, but I just would ask us to look at the reading levels at those Title I schools, at the math levels of those Title I schools, and I think we need to, at the same time as we're looking at money, I think we need to look at the current achievement levels and say which is our priority.
I have a question for you, Doug.
Yeah.
What's more important than the combo mitigation or the intervention coaches at those? Because if we got rid of the 6 combo mitigation, I think that could fill in your gaps that you're bringing up for those other
Yeah,
schools.
because I am like Zesty. I just, these schools that have only one FTE, or one, or even 1.5, it's not enough. It's not enough.
So what if we took away those 6 combo mitigation classrooms?
And that was discussed at the last study session, and there was a decision made. I don't think we can continually change our decisions.
Well, that's what these meetings are for, though. We can until the budget's adopted. But if you're finding that intervention is, I mean, I agree, the more intervention, I don't think the 6 classrooms, we receive as much of a benefit to the district funding 6 combo mitigation classrooms as we would funding 6 FTEs in intervention as a overall whole for the district and good to the district. If you've got the combo mitigation, yes, those classes are smaller, which we all know would be great in a perfect world, where that teacher's only going to have 22 kids versus the 60 or so each FTE of intervention can affect in a school year.
So this kind of helps solve this too. What if we were to be closing our books and then realize we needed to save 2.5 this year, but we ended up saving 3.5? Would the board be interested in that additional $1 million to fund an additional half FTE, to your point, Mr. Paulson, as opposed to going back on staffing decisions that have already been made, and frankly, teachers have already been placed for next year? That's so kind of more to the point of moving things forward is any additional funds that become available, would you want us to use that to continue to grow intervention as much as we can?
For me, and maybe we should just do a straw poll with everybody, I would say yes, if money becomes available, we should be equitably funding intervention until we can. I think there will always be a need for additional intervention, especially at our Title I schools, but I think that intervention needs to be distributed based on student learner needs at those schools, and not based on just every school gets the same.
And as it's laid out here, it's the Title I schools, which obviously we know how the Title I funding arrives at a district and why it's focused on the schools that it is. Those schools would still, anything added to them, they still are ahead of some of the other schools. And I understand Rose is kind of on the cusp there. But again, additional monies, intervention is where we should plan to place that in our adopted budget.
But Doug, I understand your point, but I think there still needs to be, at minimum, a 1 FTE at each site, no matter if they're Title I or not, because I don't think a half of FTE, you're switching schools, you're going back and forth, is going to be as effective as having a minimum of 1, and then we can add to the, to the other Title I's as well.
Dr. Filio, what would that look like? Would the intervention teacher be going one school one day, another school the next? What would that look like? Or would it be that they were doing something else for a half a day at their site and then working on this in addition? What would that look like?
I think some of that would depend on the individual, and if there was 0.5 from this, but maybe they were 0.5 doing something else. Audrey?
Most recent
So-
principal in the room.
So we currently have a number, when this all happened, we currently have a number of 0.5 FTEs who were intervention teachers. So we then had to combine those teachers to be a full FTE in a classroom. So some of those teachers would like to come back and do 0.5. So I can give an example. For an LR Green, I had a 0.5 math and a 0.5 ELA. Those were 2 separate people, and that's what those teachers wanted to work. So that can be done. I mean, there are people who want to do just that. there are teachers who are excellent at doing just that.
And sometimes it does work out with the schedules, because you try to get all your academics done in the
Yeah.
morning time. You know, so it's.
But
really
that
just-
doesn't mean, I understand the scheduling part of it perfectly well, but it still needs to be a one full FTE, even though it's half math, half reading. I mean, so now, you know, if you're at one of these other schools, who we still have struggling students at these other schools, none of these are, you know, we're not at proficient at any of these schools, even though they're not Title I. They still have enough needs that I feel as a minimum, we should have a one FTE at each site to start with, and the other Title Is can be added to as well. But I just don't think you can effectively serve an entire school campus at a half an FTE.
I think that you're correct in that assumption, but the problem that we run into is if we don't have the funds to do it.
Right.
What's
Resources.
Right. I mean, if the funds
we can
become
find-
if the funds become available to do it, I think that should be our priority.
Yeah.
To make it a full one person, one FTE.
And that's all I'm asking,
And,
if
but,
they can
but
find it.
if, because of the ongoing budget that we have no idea where it's going, I mean, what happens if that 1.2 million that we're supposedly
Mm-hmm.
have to spend come June is not there and is actually a minus 1.2? What do we do then?
Well, then, yeah, we gotta
Then-
pivot anyway.
Exactly, we're gonna have to pivot off of that. So I think the direction in which the staff would like to hear is, where would we like to go if we have a surplus? And I think that we're all kind of in agreement, based on what I've heard this evening, is that intervention is our priority. So if we are able to fund as much as we can, based on the extra monies that come available come June, that would be our priority. And I agree with you, it would be nice to have one FET at each school, absolutely. But unfortunately, it may or may not happen. And I think that's kind of the realization that not only this board needs to have, but also our teachers and our students, is that if the money's not there, we can't just make it happen. And we've already made decisions previously for the combo mitigation classes. So they are already in the process of putting those teachers into place for that. So for us to come back and say, well, let's just eliminate that, one is going to throw a wrench into the works that I don't think is fair to them. So it's one of those things where I think we need to move forward in this discussion, in the sense that I think our priority is intervention. Let's make sure that our intervention is covered as much as we can based on the monies that come available. And if that's the direction that I think this board would like to put forward, I think that that would give them a good leeway on what to do once those hard numbers start coming in. Mark, did you have a comment?
No, it just kind of, I mean, it's an allocation of resources is what it just comes down to. And yes, in a perfect world, and I see everyone's point here, and I appreciate everybody on the board. I mean, to Mr. Paulson's point, like, if one school has twice as much need as another school, yet they both get the same amount of resources, that's not utilizing our resources in the most efficient manner. But to Zessy's point, I understand, like, hey, it would be nice if we could get everybody to the same level, but really it comes down to, and this is where I trust the staff, where is getting the resources to where the need is the most. Odds are we're never going to have enough resources to match all of our needs. I understand that. That's just unfortunate. And would it be ideal if we got surprised at the revise? Let's all cross our fingers. But, I wouldn't put a lot of,
In a positive way.
Correct.
Yes, yes.
But, so, I mean, that's what I trust staff to do, and Dr. Varr and your team to put the resources where they're needed most, not just the cookie cutter of everything is here. Yes, it would be nice, and I trust that we can get to a point that we can get as much services to those that need it in the most efficient manner. So, those are just my thoughts, and, this is what this conversation's about. I think, as Mr. Houston mentioned, we want as much intervention as we can get, and to make sure that those resources go where they're needed the most, as judiciously as possible.
I think the word for the May revise may be shocked rather than surprised.
All right, I think we have, anything else?
For the whole thing, I got other comments on the,
Oh,
on the
absolutely,
besides
please.
intervention.
Okay, please go forward.
Well, jumping over the interventions for the ELOP after school, my only thoughts are in there, it's all in the execution. Like we said, we want the, intervention in ELOP, and I just, we've seen how the wheel is stumbled, and so I want to make sure when we do put this together, like, I liked your idea about the 30-30, because it was supposed to be, a carrot for the fun intervention, to keep the kids there, that they look forward to something. But if we're not teaching them and getting them up to proficient level, I don't really, if they can do the enrichment, I don't know how that benefits them in the long run. Obviously, it's fun, but I think we do need more of that 30-30 component or something like that to really give even more to those students who are in need and are trying to make up the 3 and the 4 and the, grade level difference in their achievement. And I think that's really important. So I really want to pay attention to the intervention in the ELOP program, how that's rolled out, and then how many students are, actually participating in it, like if they're actually going to it, that type of thing, to make sure it's effective, because that's the bottom line of this. A couple things. Sorry, before I get to my other stuff. For the science curriculum, I know I had asked Dr. Ibarra this, so I wanted to bring it up in front of the board. My suggestion would be is if we could look at using that Mackenzie Scott, the interest off of it, maybe that could fund over a multi-year the science curriculum, the adoption. That was just one idea to throw out there to try to move up that science adoptions from 2008, since we have that money and we haven't assigned it really to anything yet, coming out the gate. So that was one of my ideas. And then, did we ever find out if there was grants for crossing guards? Because that was my only other concern, that, how that plan, or will we get a presentation on how we're planning on changing the crossing guard program to still protect the kids, but at a lower cost?
We can do that at a future board meeting. I would say, though, is that we have had some crossing guards in some areas that really it doesn't warrant it, and so we feel that with just slightly bit more than the 300,000 we talked about at the last study session, that we would actually be able to cover the corners that we need to have covered. And so I believe that's something that we'll update the board obviously about that, but I don't think it's going to be as much of an impact as we initially might have thought.
Okay, perfect. And then a couple things. I wanted to thank Michelle Cagle and her team for keep working on this and working some miracles and figuring out all these numbers. I wanted to thank you. I really appreciated all your wisdom. And then I know it's not report time, but from the Personnel Commission meeting, what your impact and your knowledge of our district. So I really appreciate you contributing and the ideas you have and continue to have. So she does an amazing job. I just wanted to say thank you to her. And then I also wanted to say, and I think the whole board, I'm going to speak for the whole board, but it's okay. Wanted to thank all of our temporary teachers and a few of our teachers that, because of these budget cuts and these changes, can't stay with this district. But your impact has been felt, and we wanted to thank you. And we wish you nothing but the best. We wish we can, at some point, that you can come back to EUSD. But we wanted to say thank you, that we really appreciate. You got us through a really tough time with COVID, and I know you appreciated our students, and you took care of them, and we're very grateful for that. We could not have made it through it without you guys, and we are sorry this is the situation, but we really appreciate everything you've done for us. So that was it.
And I would like to add on to that, counselors and everybody else who has been a victim of this. These are a lot of really excellent people who have been outstanding assets to this district and are leaving us very unfortunately leaving us, and they have been very appreciated.
And I concur.
As do I.
$8 million it's a lot. It's a lot. But I do want to also end on what we still have and what we're still going to have for next year. We still have our original systemic structures. We still have a social worker at every site. including the middle schools. We still have 2 counselors and a social worker at every middle school. We still have family liaisons. We still have a lot of amazing, I mean, our after-school programs have exploded. Summer camps, spring camps, our kids are so engaged. We still have an outstanding PTA council that is just continuing to grow and support our schools and bringing in amazing programs that are also, again, helping our students. I just heard from the PTA council that they're going to be funding a free book for every student at Orange Glen Elementary School. Thank you, Mr. Jones, for spearheading that conversation. Now, just a lot of amazing things that still continue to have. I mean, we still have our teachers collaborating every week. Our teachers still have prep time with the help of our PE. They have PE teachers, and then our teachers get prep time. We haven't lost all of that. We still have all of those that continue to make us a very special place to be. So just a few reminders of what we still have. And amazing kids and amazing staff.
Anything else? Did we provide
Yes.
guidance?
Yes, you did.
Fantastic, okay. Anything else? Mark?
No, thank you very much to staff.
Zesty? No? John?
I know we have laid off a couple of our middle school counselors. I very much appreciate the fact that we released them early from their contract so they could take up new positions. And my school, Orange Glen High School, benefited from one of those who started today. And the elementary district's loss is the high school district's gain. I also just want to shout out to our Human Resources Department that is doing an excellent job of hiring a lot of new paraprofessionals, instructional aides for next year for the P3 program. They had a job fair, a one-stop hiring shop at Orange Glen High School on Tuesday, and on the spot hired 15 individuals who are, 17, 18-year-olds walking into a full-time benefited retirement position and are starting college. And as several of them related, we've made it further already than our parents, and that's a cool feeling. So thank you all for that work.
Joe?
I'm fine.
You're fine, okay. And I'm also fine. Thank you very much. All right. Next meeting. Excuse me, the next meeting, next regular scheduled board meeting will be held on Thursday, May 9th, 2024 at 7 p.m. at the Escondido Union School District, Carolyn Gilbert Education Center.
I feel like we have to sit here for an hour.
No, I will be adjourning this. This is adjourned. Thank you.
And you could all sit here for like 30.